Hey guys, my name is Anthony and in today's video I'm going to be talking about how to practice for a league race. So I know some of you guys are new to F1 2020 and you want to start league racing because maybe you've seen people like TRL Limitless or Veloce Surprise aka Josh Adowu, or even myself, even though I'm not really on the same level as those guys. Maybe you've seen some of my videos on my league races and you've maybe wanted to actually get yourself involved in those sort of things. So if you want to see more videos similar to this, make sure to hit the like button and stick around by subscribing to the channel. Now I'd like to quickly thank Sparks for coming up with the idea. He came to me on Twitter and we sort of had a quick back and forth, and he mentioned how he's never really seen a video on F1 about how to actually practice for league races, and I thought that was a really good idea. So that's what we're going to be talking about in today's video. So for this video, how we're going to structure it is I've gotten Sparks to write down some notes on what he feels people should be doing when it comes to practicing and what people shouldn't be doing when it comes to practicing. So I'm going to cover those, and then we're going to sort of move on to how to actually set up different type of lobbies that replicate league races so that you guys can really get the practice that you're looking for when it comes to these events. Okay, so first off, we're going to talk about over practicing. When it comes to over practicing, it's basically where you just practice too much for whatever it is that you're doing, and these things can happen even in sports such as boxing, where you're going through a camp. It's completely possible to overtrain your fighter, and by the time he actually gets into the ring, his body's fatigued, his mind's fatigued, and he's not going to be able to perform the same way that he was at the beginning of his camp, for example. And the same thing applies to league racing. If you're practicing too much, when it comes to the actual race itself, you're not going to perform as well as you think, because you've over practiced, your mind's tired and your body is also tired. And yeah, sure, when it comes to the esports guys, they are practicing multiple hours a day every day. However, they're used to that. It's their job to be the best in the game, and if they don't practice that much, they're going to be left behind by other esports drivers. However, for guys like us who are just playing for fun, by doing this, you're overexerting yourself because you're not used to that sort of training. So your body's going to be tired, your mind's going to be tired, and your head is not going to be in the race by the time that you get there. So you would have already overexerted yourself before you even got on the starting grid. So according to the notes that Sparks has written, he practices usually 2 to 3 hours 2 to 3 times before the race, and he would usually do his last practice session on the day of the race. So I highly recommend that you guys at least do one practice session on the day of the race, and then maybe, you know, a couple of days before you can maybe spread out 1 or 2 different practice sessions to really get your setup built and really see how the setup feels on the car for different type of tires, for different types of fuel load, etc, etc. So moving on to lack of practice. Now I'm pretty sure a lot of you guys who watch my videos also watch videos and live streams from TRL Limitless, and you've probably been in one of his live streams where before the race he said something along the lines of him not being able to do a lot of practice, and yet he's still gone in, still ended up with pole, and still ended up winning the race. And the reason why he's able to do that even with a lack of practice is because he has something to compensate for that not a lot of us have, and that is experience, and a lot of it. I think JD has about 10 years of league racing experience, whereas for someone like me, for example, I only started league racing in January of this year, and I did my first league race around about the end of January. So I don't even have 9 months of experience yet, where he's got about 10 years. So the fact that he's able to just come in and still do the business even though he has done a lack of practice is because he has the experience to compensate for the lack of practice, whereas someone like you or myself who's more new to league racing, we don't have that experience yet, so we really need to compensate for the experience with practice. So the next thing in Sparks' notes is time trial. I know a lot of you guys use time trial in order to practice for your races, and for the longest time I did as well. However, using time trial to practice for a league race is probably one of the worst things you can do, and that's because of the way that the car is set up during a time trial session. And what I mean by that is when it comes to your car in time trial, there's no tire degradation or tire wear on the car, and your car is always running on the lowest amount of fuel possible, which means that your car is always at peak performance during time trial. However, in league races, your car is rarely ever in peak performance. So you're going to want to make sure that you're practicing in an environment that replicates the league races itself. Now, one thing that I wanted to mention that backs up my claim that if you practice in an environment that doesn't replicate the real thing, it will hurt you, is from a YouTuber that I watch from time to time named Ermin, and he did a video on Veloce James. Now, if you don't know who Veloce James is, he's an F1 2020 esports driver for McLaren. However, he's also a real-life GT3 driver, and in one of his GT3 races, it was in wet conditions, and he wasn't able to perform at the same pace that he performed in dry conditions, and that's because there's not really a sim out there that truly replicates wet condition driving in a GT3 car. So James wasn't able to use his sims like rFactor 2 and ACC to really replicate the environment needed to practice for wet condition driving, and it hurt him in the end. And the same thing can happen in league racing. If you're practicing in time trial where the car is always at peak performance and peak grip, you're not going to be able to adapt to the car when the tires are dead or at the start of the race when you're running most of the fuel. So now that we've talked about time trial and why me and Sparks feel that it isn't a good environment for you to practice in, let's talk about how to actually set up some lobbies so that you can actually replicate the environment that you're going to be in during a league race as closely as you can. So first up, we're going to be talking about GP mode. Now, sometimes you're not going to be able to practice with your friends or fellow league racers because they may be busy or something like that, so you're going to have to end up practicing on your own. And there is another way that you can practice on your own, but I personally feel that using GP mode is the best way to practice when you're on your own. So let's talk about how to set up a GP lobby. So the first thing I like to do is I like to choose the Mercedes car, and the reason why I like to choose the Mercedes car is because it's the closest car in GP mode to the equal performing cars online. It doesn't really matter whether you choose Lewis Hamilton or Valtteri Bottas, either way you just choose the Mercedes. And next, obviously, you're going to want to go onto the track. So after you've chose the track that you're going to be racing at, that's when you start applying some of the settings. Now, when it comes to choosing the AI, what I like to do is I like to actually ask some of the fellow league racers that I have in my league which AI they tend to play against when they do play against the AI. Now, the reason why I like to do that is because it shows me their pace, and usually the people in my leagues tend to play around 110% AI. So when I'm practicing in GP mode, I'll play against 110% AI because that gives me a rough estimate to where I would be in terms of pace to my fellow league racers. And then after you've chose your AI, you can pretty much just try and replicate everything else that's in your league races. So you can replicate the qualifying type, whether it's short or full, and then you can replicate the race distance, whether it's 50%, 25%, or even 100%. Next, which is probably the best way that you can practice for a league race, is practicing with your friends or with your fellow league racers. So I've probably got some background footage of Sparks driving and how he practices when it comes to practicing with other people. And basically, when it comes to practicing with other people, you just want to try and replicate your league racing settings as much as you possibly can. So if you're using realistic performing cars, you're going to want to choose those. If you're using equal performing cars, you're going to want to choose those. And then again, you're just going to want to choose the qualifying type that you use. So in WOR, for example, the league that I race in Tuesdays, they use a short qualifying method, so I would do short qualifying. However, in TSRL, which is the league I race on Fridays, they do full qualifying, so I replicate that by doing full qualifying practice. And then after the more important settings, you can start changing some of the miscellaneous settings. So if there's a corner cutting on strict, or if it's on regular, you can do that, because again, you want to replicate the actual settings of your races as much as possible. And then lastly, you can go into unranked by yourself. Now obviously you won't be able to do stuff like qualifying by yourself. However, you can set up a practice session, and then you can just put a bit of fuel in, maybe like 10 or even 15 laps, depending on how much fuel you can actually put in the car. And then you can go out and just drive and see how the car feels with the setup that you've got. And you can also track the tire degradation or tire wear on the car as well. So that would give you a rough idea as to how much tire wear you can expect to see in your races. So I really hope that this video was insightful and helped you understand the importance of practicing for a league race and actually what to do when it comes to practicing for a league race. So if you want to see more videos like this, make sure to hit the like button and stick around by subscribing to the channel. We're trying to hit 2,000 subscribers by the end of the year, so let's see if we can hit that, and I'll see you guys in my next video.